My mother didn't even lower her voice when she said it. "I know you paid off the $680,000 mortgage, but we're gifting the house to your brother as his graduation present." I was still holding the phone when she added almost cheerfully, "And you're not invited to the party." The room around me went quiet, in that sharp, unreal way, like every year I'd spent saving that house evaporated at once. I turned to my uncle, the only person who knew the truth, and asked, "You want to tell them, or should I?" Because 3 days later, nothing about their big day looked the same. I grew up in a 2-story house on a quiet street in Rochester, the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches and every season had its own sound. To most people, that house looked steady white, citing a porch light that never quite warmed up curtains my mother loved to iron. But inside there was an order you learned early or you suffered for it. My mother, Angela Dawson, owner of a busy neighborhood restaurant and the unquestioned authority of our home, had a way of turning her version of events into fact. She carried herself like someone who held the family on her shoulders, even when the weight came from choices she refused to face. My father, Gregory Dawson, my quiet, agreeable dad, who worked long hours as a mechanic, mostly followed her lead. He rarely pushed back, not even when the truth bent so far it scraped. And then there was Dylan, my younger brother, 4 years behind me, but always miles ahead in my mother's eyes. He got the new backpacks, the weekend trips, the extra tutoring when his grades dipped. I got, "You're strong, you'll figure it out." She said it like praise, but it felt like dismissal wearing cheap perfume. By the time I was 16, I understood the rules. Dylan's needs came first. My father stayed neutral, and my mother ran her household like a stage she refused to step down from. I worked after school, saved for community college, and learned not to ask for things she'd already decided I didn't need. Independence wasn't a choice, it was survival. Years later, when I came home to visit, I opened a kitchen drawer and found a stack of unopened envelopes from the bank. The sight of them, heavy stamped, ignored, made something in my chest tilt. My parents were months behind on the mortgage. The house was slipping. And my mother, the woman who loved being seen as the hero of every story, hadn't told a soul. That night, I sat in my old bedroom and did the math. I knew what I earned, what I could cut, and what it would cost me. 5 years' worth of payments meant my own life would slow to a crawl, but losing that house would finish them. So I stepped into the space my mother swore she already occupied and carried the weight myself. She never mentioned those payments again, except to take the credit. 3 days after that phone call, I found myself standing under a line of maples at the annual family cookout by Lake Ontario. The air smelled like charcoal and sunscreen, the same mix I'd grown up with. But this year, something in the atmosphere felt tilted, like everyone else had received a script I'd never seen. I spotted Dylan, my younger brother, laughing with a cluster of cousins who already spoke as if the house were his. When he moves in, one of them said he should redo the yard. It's such a great starter home. Starter home? The words landed like gravel in my mouth. Across the picnic tables, my mother Angela stood near the grill, waving her hands as she told a story I'd heard versions of for years. It was brutal keeping the place afloat, she said to Aunt Linda and 2 neighbors. But you know me, I pushed through. I wasn't about to let that house slip away. All I could do was stare at her. The confidence, the convenience, the absolute certainty that everyone would accept her version without blinking. And they did. Heads nodded. Someone patted her shoulder. No one asked who had actually written the checks. My father Gregory hovered behind her quiet, as always adding just enough supportive hums to make it seem like he remembered things the same way. I felt my jaw tighten. 5 years of payments had emptied entire seasons of my life, late nights, skipped trips, worn-out shoes, and she stood there spinning a myth polished enough to shine. Then came the real blow. My cousin Nina Lane, who worked with financial files, pulled me aside. She lowered her voice. "Your mom's already trying to move the house into Dylan's name," she whispered. "But there's a problem. The trust your Uncle Edward set up, it's blocking everything. The world sharpened. The trust, the one I barely remembered signing, the one my uncle pushed for just in case." I looked across the field to where Uncle Edward sat at a picnic table watching the crowd with that level, patient expression he wore when he'd already done the math long before anyone else caught on. I walked over the folder I'd brought tucked under my arm. I hadn't planned to use it. I'd brought it the way you bring an umbrella when the sky threatens to split open. When I reached his side, I laid the folder on the table and flipped it open. Payments bills, the trust pages with my name tied to every obligation. Conversations around us quieted one ripple at a time. Edward cleared his throat. "Melody," he murmured, "are you sure I wasn't sure about much?" But I was done disappearing. I turned toward him, my voice low and steady. "You want to tell them I asked, or should I?" His eyes met mine. And that was the moment everything shifted. The night after the cookout, I drove to my parents' house, expecting tension, maybe a clipped conversation at the doorway. I didn't expect the silence that greeted me, a strange, hollow quiet that felt staged. The porch light flickered the way it always had, but when I slipped my key into the lock, it hit metal and refused to turn. I tried again. Nothing. Then the door opened just a few inches, and Dylan, my younger brother, filled the gap. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't apologizing. He just stared at me like I was a problem he'd been warned about. "Mom said you should call first," he muttered. I held up my useless key. "You changed the lock." He didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. "This place is kind of in transition right now." Transition. As if the house I'd kept alive was shedding me like old paint. Behind him I saw moving boxes his. My parents stood farther back in the hallway, not close enough to engage, but close enough to witness. My mother's expression was unreadable, but my father's eyes dropped the moment mine rose to find his. "Dylan," I said quietly, "move." But he didn't. He pulled the door until only a sliver of light framed his face. "Mel," he said, and for a second his voice softened, almost pleading, but then it hardened again. "Mom doesn't want drama." The lock clicked, the porch light flickered, and I stood there with a key that meant nothing. The drive back to my apartment blurred. By the time I walked inside, my chest felt too tight to breathe. I kicked off my shoes, pulled down the storage box from the top shelf, and dumped everything onto the kitchen table. Payments, bills, late notices from years ago, copies of the trust. Every receipt I'd kept so I wouldn't forget what I'd sacrificed. 5 years of my life lay in a messy, damning heap. I sat down and pressed my palms to the table's edge. I had never asked for recognition, not once. I had saved the house because it was my family's anchor, the one thing that had survived every argument, every slammed door, every cold shoulder. But now they were rewriting even that. A quiet knock pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, Uncle Edward stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "You went by the house," he said. Not a question. He'd heard. In a family like mine, news traveled faster than truth. I led him inside, gestured toward the spread of papers. He exhaled long and slow. "Your mother's pushing hard, harder than I expected. Luckily, the trust gives you leverage." "More than leverage, actually." I felt something shift. "What do you mean?" He tapped a clause with his finger. "This line. Your payments don't just tie you to responsibility. They tie you to control." Those words sat deep like a stone dropping into water. The next morning, I took the entire box to Patrick O'Neill, the attorney I'd been referred to. He studied the trust flipping pages with the kind of focus that made the air feel sharper. "Melody," he said, "you're not powerless. If they're trying to transfer the property around you, you have full grounds to stop it." He explained the process step by step: formal filings property, review a temporary block on any transfer. Everything was legal, structured, quiet. Once you file, he said, they won't be able to hide this. I walked out of his office with the paperwork already drafted. Back home, I signed. I submitted. I waited. 3 days, I whispered to myself. 3 days was all it would take. 3 days later, my brother's big day turned into something none of them could control. I drove down their street just as the sun pulled itself over the rooftops, throwing long, pale lines across the pavement. Balloons were tied to the mailbox. Folding tables were already set in the yard, covered with graduation decorations in my mother's favorite colors. From a distance, it looked like a perfect morning, like the version of our family she always tried to sell to the world. But halfway up the driveway, a white city vehicle was parked in front of the porch. 2 officials stood on the steps with clipboards in hand. Martha Reed, our neighbor who lived directly across the street, watched everything from her window. She wouldn't have to say much later. Her eyes had already taken the whole story in. My mother Angela opened the front door wearing a smile meant for guests. The smile broke the second she saw the uniforms. "Is something wrong?" she asked, already bracing her voice. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we're delivering formal notice. This property has an active dispute filed under the trust connected to your home. Due to the terms in that filing, no transfer can proceed until the review is complete." I watched my mother's face freeze, not in fear at first, but in disbelief that someone dared interrupt her script. "There must be a mistake," she insisted. "We're simply gifting the property to our son. It's our home." The official shook his head. "Not according to the trust and the payment records attached to it. The name listed here," he tapped the folder, "holds authority. Not yours." For a moment she didn't understand, or maybe she refused to. "Who filed this?" she demanded. Her eyes swept the street and landed on me. The air between us tightened. Before she could say more, another sound broke the stillness, the grind of a tow truck engine turning the corner. It rolled to a stop at the end of the driveway. The driver stepped out, checked a clipboard, and called out, "Dylan Dawson." My brother, 24 years old, always cushioned from consequences, came tearing out of the house. "That's me," he said. "But that's my car. There's no reason for—" "It's being repossessed," the driver replied. "Payments behind." This was the earliest pickup time. Dylan turned to my mother, panic flashing across his face. "Mom, do something." But she couldn't. There was no check she could quietly write, no bill she could slip into the trash, no narrative she could twist fast enough. The truck lifted the front wheels of his car, the metal clank echoing through the yard. Several relatives, already arriving early for the celebration, stopped mid-step. Balloons fluttered overhead. The whole scene looked surreal, like a party collapsing under its own decorations. I stepped out of my car, calm in a way even I didn't expect. Patrick O'Neill, my attorney, pulled up behind me. Uncle Edward walked at my side. We approached the porch together. My mother stared at me, color rising in her cheeks. "You did this," she hissed. "I enforced the trust you signed." I said, voice steady. "Nothing more." "This is your brother's graduation," she snapped. "He deserves this house." "He didn't pay for it," I replied. "And you know that." "That doesn't matter," she shot back. "It matters legally." Patrick interrupted, stepping forward. "Mrs. Dawson, the trust was created years ago to protect this property. At the time, you agreed that the individual making the payments would have final authority. That individual is Melody." My father, Gregory, slipped onto the porch, rubbing the back of his neck like he wanted to disappear. "Let's just calm down," he muttered. But he wasn't talking to my mother. He was talking to himself. Angela pointed a shaking hand at Patrick. "We didn't mean for that to be permanent. That's not how trust agreements work," Patrick replied gently. "And your attempt to transfer the house behind her back triggered the review." Murmurs spread among relatives, forming a semicircle on the lawn. My cousin, Aunt Linda's daughter, whispered loudly, "Wait." Melody paid the mortgage. Another cousin frowned. For years, and nobody said anything. My mother's lips were trembling now, not with guilt, but with the realization that her story was slipping. That trust was for emergencies, she insisted. It wasn't supposed to give her control. Uncle Edward took one small step forward, his voice calm but unshakable. "Angela, I set up that trust because you and Gregory were drowning. You signed it willingly, and Melody saved your home. If she hadn't stepped in when she did, the bank would have taken everything." My mother blinked rapidly, anger, panic, and denial fighting for space. "This is still our house," she said, almost pleading. "We built our lives here." "And I protected it," I answered softly. "I just didn't realize you'd erase me to do it." She turned to my father as if searching for backup, but he dropped his gaze. For once, even he couldn't pretend. Patrick opened the folder. Under the trust, Ms. Lane may decide how the property is handled. What happens now is her choice. My mother looked at me like I'd pulled the floor out from under her. What are you doing?" she whispered. "I'm enforcing boundaries," I said, something I should have done years ago. Behind her, I saw the hallway, the same hallway where I'd dropped my backpack as a kid, the same place I'd heard whispered arguments about money, the same path that now led to Dylan's boxes stacked like trophies he hadn't earned. "This house won't be transferred," I continued. "You'll have a set amount of time to move to the rental you signed for. You're kicking us out." Dylan burst out disbelief, cracking his voice. "After everything Mom did for you," the irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I breathed. "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said. "I'm following the agreement Mom signed, the one that gives me responsibility and authority. I'm your mother." Angela snapped, suddenly voice breaking. "You can't do this to me." "I didn't do anything," I said, quietly. "You did." The tow truck pulled away with Dylan's car. A balloon string snapped and drifted into the air. A banner that read, "Congrats." Dylan sagged in the middle. People were leaving early now, pretending they'd forgotten something at home. The perfect day my mother had imagined her triumphant story had collapsed under the weight of the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. Angela took a small, unsteady step backward. My father caught her elbow. Dylan stood still, finally silent. I turned to leave with Edward and Patrick, the breeze carrying the faint rustle of the banner behind me. Their big day wasn't ruined. It was rewritten. In the weeks that followed, everything settled into a quieter, truer shape. The property review confirmed exactly what Patrick had predicted. The trust stood firm. Every payment I'd made over 5 years was accounted for, and the house legally and practically shifted fully under my authority. There were no dramatic hearings, no shouting matches, no last-minute twists, just paperwork signatures and a clarity my family had avoided for years. My mother, Angela, and my father, Gregory, moved into a modest rental on the other side of Rochester. Not out of punishment, but because the trust no longer allowed them to treat the house as a prop in a story that erased me. Even my mother didn't argue with the deadline. She packed quietly, her voice thin whenever we crossed paths. My father kept his head down, helping her carry boxes to the car. Dylan stripped of the house, and the car he'd assumed were waiting for him took a job at a local warehouse. For the first time in his life, people expected things from him he couldn't charm his way out of. When I drove past him one afternoon, he didn't wave. He just stared at the pavement like it finally asked something of him, too. As for me, I took slow ownership of the house. I fixed the creaking step on the porch, repainted the kitchen, opened windows that hadn't been touched in years. It felt strange at first, claiming something I'd protected for so long but never truly believed could be mine. Strange and peaceful. Standing in that house now, I finally understand something I spent years avoiding. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's the first honest form of love you learn when the people who should have cared for you choose comfort over truth. I didn't win a victory over my family. I simply stepped out of the shadow they kept me in. If you've ever carried everything alone or been written out of your own story, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story.